Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes, we get sources that are like straight out of a spy thriller.
Oh, tell me about it.
And this one is definitely one of those.
Yeah.
We're looking at what seems to be a leaked audio recording labeled War in the Shadowlands, Sigyn Adnam 1.
Wow.
I am a little worried about what Sigyn implies.
Yeah, it makes you wonder who's listening in.
Right, but let's dive in.
All right. Well, it does make you wonder who's
Yeah.
listening, right? But what's fascinating about this recording is that it's not about the wars that we see on the news every day.
Right.
It's actually arguing that those are just symptoms of a much deeper conflict. A MetaWar, as the speaker calls it.
Okay, I have to admit, MetaWar sounds a little bit like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right.
I'm picturing laser beams and spaceships.
Not quite that dramatic.
Okay.
But it is about control, a battle for control.
Okay.
So think of it this way. Instead of tanks and bombs, the weapons here are information and narratives. The goal is to influence how people think, what they believe, and ultimately how they act.
So it's like hacking, but instead of computers, they're hacking our minds.
You got it. Exactly. And the speaker in this recording, they argue that this is happening all around us, subtly shaping our perceptions, our decisions even. They even use the term digital simulator.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on. Digital simulator. That sounds pretty intense. So does that mean like everything we see online is fake?
It's not about everything being fake.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that the information that we're exposed to is often very carefully curated
Okay.
and manipulated to achieve certain goals. Think about social media algorithms,
Yeah.
for example.
Okay.
They're designed to keep you engaged, but that often means showing you content that just reinforces your existing beliefs, creating these echo chambers.
Ah, echo chambers.
Yeah.
So that's like when you're only hearing opinions that agree with your own and any dissenting voices are silenced?
Precisely. And that can make it very difficult to have any kind of meaningful conversations or to even understand different points of view.
Right.
Because it's like everyone's living in their own little information bubble.
Okay. And the speaker in this recording is saying this is all part of this MetaWar. So someone is deliberately creating these echo chambers for what? What is the point?
That's where it gets really interesting. The speaker uses some pretty vivid language to describe the stakes of this MetaWar, drawing parallels between cybersecurity threats like ransomware
Okay.
and the idea of spiritual manipulation.
Now that is a connection I would not have made.
Interesting, right?
Ransomware and spiritual manipulation, what?
Think about how ransomware works.
Yeah.
It basically locks down your computer and holds your data hostage.
Right.
The speaker is arguing that certain types of information or narratives can essentially do the same thing to our minds.
Okay.
They can lock down our critical thinking, making us more susceptible to manipulation and control.
So you're saying that just like a virus can infect a computer, certain ideas or narratives can infect our minds. That's a chilling thought.
It is, and the speaker doesn't shy away from strong imagery to kind of get that point across. They even compare it to spiritual slavery, using biblical language like slaves to sin to describe how we can become enslaved to our own desires, our fears, and the manipulative narratives that exploit those very vulnerabilities.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty heavy stuff. Spiritual slavery in the digital age. But why use biblical imagery? I don't get the connection.
Well, what's fascinating is that the speaker seems to be drawing a parallel between the concept of spiritual warfare, as described in, religious texts, and this modern-day battle for our minds.
Okay. Yeah.
Suggesting that the same forces that tempt us towards sin,
Right.
towards selfishness, greed, the abuse of power, they're also at work in this MetaWar.
So it's like those age-old temptations, those weaknesses in human nature are being exploited through technology and information.
Exactly. The recording argues that our fears, our pride, our desire for belonging, even our longing for simple answers in a complex world, it can all be used against us in this MetaWar.
Wow.
These vulnerabilities become entry points
Right.
for these manipulative narratives to take root and spread.
Okay, so far this is sounding pretty bleak. We're trapped in a digital simulator bombarded with manipulative narratives, and our own weaknesses are being used against us. Is there any hope here? Does the speaker offer any solutions at all?
They do, and it starts with awareness. The recording is kind of like a wake-up call, urging us to recognize the reality of this MetaWar, to understand the tactics being used against us.
But if we're all caught in this digital simulator, as they call it, how do we even know what's real anymore? How do we break free from the manipulation?
That's where it gets challenging but also empowering. The speaker really emphasizes the importance of something they call metavision. It's a way of seeing the world that goes beyond the surface level of information and discerns the deeper forces at play.
Metavision. That sounds very abstract.
Yeah.
Can you give us a more concrete understanding of what that means?
Yeah, so think of it as developing a kind of information radar,
Okay.
the ability to kind of detect and analyze the signals that we're receiving. It's about questioning everything, evaluating sources, looking for evidence, and identifying potential biases or agendas.
So it's like becoming our own fact checkers, our own media critics.
Exactly. And the recording suggests that developing this metavision requires a shift in consciousness, a willingness to look beyond our own biases
Right.
and to challenge the narratives that we've been conditioned to accept.
Okay, so developing this metavision is the first step. But what about concrete actions? What can we actually do to protect ourselves from this MetaWar?
That's where the speaker gets really practical. They talk about the need for something they call hardened communication networks, which might sound like a technical term,
Yeah.
but it has a much broader application.
I'm intrigued. Hardened communication networks. Sounds like we need to build some digital fortresses.
It's more about building resilience,
Okay.
both in our own minds and in our communities.
Okay.
Think of it as strengthening our defenses against manipulation and misinformation.
So like building up our mental immune systems. But how do we do that? Give us some practical tips.
One crucial step is to diversify our information sources.
Okay.
Instead of relying on a single news outlet or social media platform, we have to actively seek out information from a variety of different perspectives,
Okay.
including those that might challenge our own.
So break out of our echo chambers and expose ourselves to different viewpoints, even if they make us uncomfortable.
It is.
That sounds like a challenge, especially in today's world.
Yeah, but it's essential for developing those critical thinking skills and becoming more resilient to manipulation. And speaking of critical thinking, that's another key component of hardening our communication networks. Learn to question everything you read or hear. Evaluate sources, look for evidence, identify potential biases.
Be skeptical, be discerning, do your own research. That's a lot of work.
It is, but the recording argues that we can't afford to be passive consumers of information.
Right.
In this meta war,
Okay.
we need to be active, engaged, and critical thinkers if we want to protect our minds and make informed decisions.
Okay, so diversify our information sources, sharpen our critical thinking skills, and what else? What other weapons do we have in this arsenal against MetaWar?
The speaker also emphasizes the importance of building strong social connections.
Okay.
Surround yourself with people who share your values,
Yeah.
who can help you stay grounded in reality, and who encourage critical thinking and open dialogue.
So find your tribe,
Yes,
your community of truth seekers.
exactly.
That makes sense. It's easier to resist manipulation when you have a support system, right? People you can trust to help you sort through the noise.
Exactly. And the recording also hints at a spiritual dimension to this resistance.
Oh, that's right. The speaker kept using that biblical imagery. So what does that mean in terms of fighting back against this meta war? Does the speaker think we need to, like, pray our way out of this?
Well, they do talk about the importance of prayer,
Okay.
but I think it's more about cultivating a deeper awareness of ourselves
Okay.
and the world around us.
Uh-huh.
They suggest that we need to tap into a higher source of wisdom,
Okay.
something beyond our own limited understanding.
Okay, I can see how that might be helpful. If this meta war is really about a battle for our souls, as the speaker seems to be suggesting, then maybe we need to arm ourselves with something more than just facts and logic.
Precisely. The recording hints at the need for spiritual discernment,
Okay.
the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood, between authentic connection and manipulation.
So it's like we need to develop a sixth sense, a kind of spiritual radar, to detect the hidden agendas and the subtle forms of manipulation that are being used against us.
Exactly. And the recording suggests that this spiritual radar isn't something mystical or magical.
Okay.
It's something that we can cultivate through practices like mindfulness, meditation, and prayer.
So by quieting the noise of the world and tuning in to our own inner wisdom, we can become more aware of the subtle influences that are shaping our perceptions and our decisions.
That seems to be the message.
Okay.
And the speaker argues that this awareness is crucial for making informed choices about who and what we serve in this meta war.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. So far, we've learned that we're all caught in this MetaWar, a battle for our minds and souls, where information is weaponized and our own vulnerabilities are exploited.
Right.
We've also learned that we can fight back by developing metavision, hardening our communication networks, and cultivating spiritual discernment. But what about the real-world implications of this MetaWar? How is it actually playing out in our lives and in our societies?
That's a great question, and it's where things start to get really interesting and a little bit scary. Remember the speaker's warning about the digital simulator?
Right.
They argue that technology can be used to manipulate and control us, even without us realizing it.
Yeah.
Think about those social media algorithms we discussed earlier. They can create a personalized information bubble,
Right.
filtering out anything that challenges your worldview.
It's like being stuck in a filter bubble, right? You're only seeing what the algorithm thinks you want to see, which might not be the whole picture.
Exactly. And this can lead to a phenomenon called epistemic closure.
Epistemic closure.
Where people become so isolated in their own beliefs that they reject any information that contradicts their worldview.
Oh, wow.
No matter how credible the source.
So it's not just about being exposed to different viewpoints, it's about being willing to consider them, to grapple with them, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Absolutely. The speaker in this recording argues that this kind of intellectual humility is really crucial for navigating the MetaWar. They warn about the dangers of information overload.
Oh, yeah.
Where we're just bombarded with so much data that it becomes difficult to distinguish truth from falsehood.
Oh, I feel that. Every time I open my newsfeed, it's like drinking from a fire hose of information.
Right.
It's overwhelming. And it's hard to know what to trust.
Exactly. And that's why the speaker emphasizes the need for discernment.
Okay.
For developing the ability to filter out the noise and focus on the signal. They talk about the need to test our signals.
Test our signals.
Verify the information we're receiving and to make sure that our communication channels are secure.
Test our signals. That sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It does, doesn't it?
What does that even mean in practical terms?
Think of it as fact-checking on steroids. It's not just about verifying the accuracy of a single piece of information, but about evaluating the source, the context, the potential biases, and the overall agenda behind the message.
So it's like becoming a detective, right? Looking for clues and piecing together the puzzle to see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the recording suggests that we can all develop these detective skills.
Okay.
It's about asking critical questions, looking for inconsistencies, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Okay, so far we've talked about the dangers of echo chambers, information overload, and the need for discernment. But how does all of this play out on a larger scale? What are the societal implications of this MetaWar?
The speaker warns about the potential for increased polarization, social unrest, and even conflict as this MetaWar intensifies.
Yeah.
When people are trapped in their own information bubbles, unable to communicate effectively across ideological divides,
Right.
it creates fertile ground for division and mistrust.
We've seen this happening already, haven't we? The rise of extremism, the spread of conspiracy theories, the increasing difficulty in having civil conversations about important issues. It feels like we're being pulled apart, divided against each other.
And that's exactly what the speaker is warning us about. They argue that the forces behind this MetaWar are deliberately seeking to sow discord, to undermine trust in institutions, and to create a climate of fear and uncertainty.
But why? What's the end goal? What do they gain from all of this chaos?
The speaker doesn't explicitly state their motives,
Okay.
but they hint at a desire for power and control. They talk about the need for hardened hearts,
Hardened hearts.
for becoming less susceptible to emotional appeals and manipulation.
Okay, but what does it mean to have a hardened heart? Does that mean we need to become cold and unfeeling?
I think the speaker's using that phrase metaphorically.
Okay.
It's not about shutting down our emotions, but about developing the discernment to recognize when our emotions are being manipulated. It's about cultivating a kind of emotional intelligence that allows us to see through the fear-mongering, the outrage, and the divisive rhetoric they're so often used to control us.
So it's about becoming more aware of our own emotional triggers, recognizing how they can be exploited, and developing the strength to resist those manipulations.
Exactly. And the recording suggests that this kind of emotional resilience is crucial for navigating the MetaWar. They argue that the forces behind this conflict are masters of playing on our emotions, using fear, anger, and outrage to drive us towards certain decisions or actions.
It's like emotional manipulation on a mass scale, right?
Yeah.
Like pushing buttons to get a desired response.
That's a great way to put it. And the speaker warns that the stakes are high. If we allow ourselves to be controlled by our emotions, we become pawns in their game.
So we need to develop a kind of emotional firewall, a way of protecting ourselves from this emotional manipulation. But how do we do that?
The speaker suggests that the key is to cultivate self-awareness, to understand our own emotional triggers, and to develop practices that help us to stay grounded and centered in the midst of chaos.
So things like mindfulness, meditation, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, those kinds of things can help us to build emotional resilience.
Exactly. The speaker argues that these practices are not just about feeling good.
Right.
They're about equipping ourselves for the MetaWar.
Okay.
They're about developing the inner strength and clarity to resist manipulation and to make choices that are aligned with our highest values.
This is where I always struggle. It's one thing to recognize the problem, but it's another thing entirely to actually do something about it. What concrete steps can we take to counter this meta war? Where do we even begin?
The speaker offers several practical suggestions. They talk about the importance of diversifying our information sources, of developing critical thinking skills, of building strong social connections, and of cultivating spiritual discernment. But they also emphasize the need for something they call hardened communication networks.
We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Building up our mental defenses,
Right.
making our minds less susceptible to manipulation.
Yes, but the speaker takes it a step further. They argue that we need to harden our communication networks on a societal level as well.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about building a more resilient society.
Right.
A culture that's less vulnerable to this kind of information warfare.
Precisely. The speaker suggests that this involves supporting independent media outlets
Okay.
that are committed to journalistic integrity,
Uh-huh.
promoting media literacy education
Okay.
that equips people with the skills to discern truth from falsehood,
Right.
and fostering a culture of open and respectful dialogue where diverse perspectives can be heard and debated.
So it's about creating a kind of societal immune system, a network of checks and balances that can help to prevent the spread of misinformation and manipulation.
That's a great analogy. The speaker seems to be arguing that we need to move beyond the individual level and start thinking about how we can build more robust and trustworthy information systems that can serve the common good.
But that sounds like a massive undertaking. How do we even begin to tackle something so complex and so entrenched?
The speaker suggests that it starts with awareness.
Okay.
We can't fight a war if we don't even know it exists.
Right.
So the first step is to educate ourselves and others about the nature of this MetaWar, the tactics being used, and the vulnerabilities being exploited.
So it's about spreading the word, raising awareness, and starting conversations about these critical issues.
Exactly. The speaker argues that we need to create a critical mass of informed and engaged citizens
Right.
who can push for change, demand accountability from those in power, and build a more resilient and truth-seeking society.
That's a pretty tall order, but it's also incredibly inspiring. It's like the speaker is calling for a revolution of consciousness, a collective awakening to the reality of this meta war, and a commitment to fighting back against the forces of darkness and deception.
It is a call to action, and it's one that we can't afford to ignore. The speaker seems to be suggesting that the future of humanity hinges on our ability to wake up to the reality of this conflict and to make conscious choices to align ourselves with the forces of truth, love, and unity.
Wow. That's a lot to take in, but in the midst of all this talk of meta war, digital simulators, and spiritual warfare, I can't help but wonder, is the speaker being a bit too dramatic? I mean, isn't it possible that they're overstating the threat? That things aren't really as dire as they make them sound?
That's a valid question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we should always ask ourselves when encountering information that triggers strong emotions or calls for radical action.
So how do we discern between genuine threats and exaggerated fear-mongering? How do we know when to take action and when to take a step back and question the narrative?
That's where critical thinking, discernment, and that meta-vision we discussed earlier come into play. The speaker is urging us to become more aware, more discerning, and more critical in our engagement with information. But they're not suggesting that we should live in a constant state of paranoia or fear.
So it's about finding a balance, right?
Yeah.
Between being aware of the potential dangers and not letting fear paralyze us or prevent us from engaging with the world.
Exactly. The speaker seems to be advocating for a kind of informed optimism,
Okay.
a recognition that the challenges are real, the stakes are high, but that we also have the power to make a difference, to choose a side, and to fight for the kind of world we want to live in.
I like that. Informed optimism. It's about acknowledging the darkness without succumbing to it.
And it's about recognizing that we're not alone in this struggle. The speaker repeatedly emphasizes the importance of community, of finding our tribe, of connecting with others who share our values and our commitment to truth.
So in a way, this meta-war is also an opportunity, a catalyst for building stronger connections, for forging alliances, and for creating a more conscious and awakened collective. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and
Right.
that we need each other to navigate these challenging times.
Exactly. The speaker seems to be suggesting that the very forces that are seeking to divide and conquer us can also be the catalyst for a deeper sense of unity and purpose. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has an incredible capacity for resilience, compassion, and love.
That's a powerful message of hope. But in the midst of all this talk about spiritual warfare and the battle for our souls, I can't help but wonder, what does the speaker actually believe? I mean, who are they fighting for? What's their vision for the future?
It's a great question, and it's one that the recording doesn't explicitly answer.
Right.
The speaker focuses more on the nature of the threat, the tactics being used, and the need for individual and collective awakening.
Right.
They leave it up to the listener to discern their own values, their own beliefs, and their own vision for the future.
So in a way, the speaker is challenging us to define our own answers, to decide for ourselves what we stand for and what we're willing to fight for.
Exactly. They're giving us the tools, the knowledge, and the awareness to engage in this meta-war, but they're not dictating the terms or the outcomes. They're empowering us to become conscious creators of our own reality, to choose a side, and to fight for the world we want to live in.
This all ties back to that powerful statement. You are at your crossroads. You need to choose. Choose this day who and what you will serve.
It's a call to action, a challenge to step out of the shadows of neutrality and to make a conscious decision about where we stand in this meta-war. The speaker seems to be suggesting that there's no room for fence-sitters, that we all need to choose a side to align ourselves with the forces of either light or darkness.
Wow, that's pretty intense, but they're not telling us which side to choose, are they?
No, they're not. And I think that's intentional. They're presenting us with a stark choice, but they're not prescribing the answer. They're challenging us to do our own research, to engage in critical thinking, to consult our own hearts, and to arrive at our own conclusions.
So in a way, this meta-war is also a battle for our autonomy, for our right to think for ourselves, to choose for ourselves, and to define our own destinies.
I think that's a brilliant insight. The speaker seems to be arguing that the true victory in this meta-war lies not in conquering others, but in conquering ourselves, in overcoming our own fears, our own biases, and our own susceptibility to manipulation. It's about reclaiming our sovereignty as individuals,
Okay.
as conscious creators of our own reality.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. This meta-war is not just about information, it's about consciousness.
Right.
It's about who we are, what we believe, and how we choose to engage with the world.
Exactly. And the speaker seems to be suggesting that the outcome of this meta-war will depend on the choices we make, not just on the battlefield of information, but also on the battlefield of our own hearts and minds.
This is a fascinating discussion, but I want to make sure we keep this relatable to our listener.
Yeah.
Can you give us some real-world examples of how this meta-war is playing out in everyday life?
Think about the way political campaigns are now fought, primarily online, with targeted messages designed to exploit our fears and biases. Or consider how certain algorithms can push people down rabbit holes of conspiracy theories, reinforcing their beliefs and isolating them from dissenting viewpoints.
You're right. And those targeted ads, they're everywhere. It's like they're reading my mind,
Right.
knowing exactly which buttons to push to get me to buy something or to click on a certain link.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The speaker in this recording is arguing that we're only beginning to understand the true scope and sophistication of this meta-war.
So what you're saying is that we're all living in a kind of psychological experiment,
Right.
a giant social media manipulation game without even realizing it.
That's a bit of a simplification,
Okay.
but it captures the essence of what the speaker is warning us about.
Okay.
They argue that we're being constantly bombarded with messages, narratives, and information designed to influence our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, often without our conscious awareness.
Okay, so we need to be more aware, more discerning, more critical in our engagement with information. But how do we do that without becoming overwhelmed, paranoid, or completely cynical?
That's a great question, and it's one that we'll explore in more depth in the next part of this deep dive.
It feels like we're walking this tightrope, you know?
Yeah.
We need to be aware of the manipulation, but not like get so bogged down in suspicion
Right.
that we lose our sense of wonder and connection with, everything.
That's exactly the balance we need to strike. And the speaker in the recording, they don't advocate for disengaging from the world or, becoming a hermit or anything like that. Instead, they actually offer a way forward, a path toward what they call awakening.
Okay, we've heard that word a few times now. Awakening. It sounds very spiritual, almost mystical. What does the speaker actually mean by that in like a practical sense?
Think of it as a process of becoming more conscious,
Okay.
more aware of the forces that are shaping our reality. It's about questioning the narratives we've been given
Okay.
and seeking out deeper truths.
Yeah.
The speaker uses this farming analogy, like you reap what you sow.
Right.
They're suggesting that if we want to live in a world of truth, justice, and love, we need to plant those seeds
Okay.
in our own minds and hearts.
So it's about taking responsibility for the information we consume,
Yes,
the choices we make, and the impact we have on the world around us.
exactly. And the speaker argues that this awakening starts with a really fundamental choice,
Okay.
a choice about who and what we will serve. They even use this biblical phrase, choose this day who you will serve.
That's a powerful statement. But isn't that a bit presumptuous? I mean, who are they to tell us who to serve?
Well, I don't think they're trying to tell us who to serve,
Okay.
but rather to highlight the fact that we're always serving something,
Okay.
whether we're conscious of it or not.
Okay.
Our choices, our actions, our beliefs,
Right.
they all reflect an allegiance to certain values, principles, or powers.
So it's about becoming more aware of those underlying allegiances?
Yeah.
Those often unconscious choices that are kind of shaping our lives and shaping our world.
Exactly. The speaker seems to be suggesting that this MetaWar is not just a battle for our minds,
Right.
but a battle for our souls, a struggle to define who we are at our core.
Okay. That brings up like the question of free will, doesn't it? If we're all being manipulated, if our minds are being hacked, do we even have a choice?
That's a really deep philosophical question,
Yeah.
and the speaker doesn't offer any, easy answers,
Yeah.
but they do seem to believe that we have a degree of agency, a capacity to choose,
Okay.
even within the constraints of this MetaWar. They argue that by becoming more aware of the manipulation,
Uh-huh.
by developing our critical thinking skills,
Right.
and by cultivating spiritual discernment, we can reclaim our power to choose.
So it's about fighting for our freedom, not just in the external world, but also in the inner world of our own minds.
Precisely. The speaker seems to be saying that true freedom begins with self-mastery, with the ability to govern our own thoughts, emotions, and actions, rather than being controlled by external forces.
This whole idea of MetaWar is a lot to wrap our heads around. But I think what's resonating with me is this idea of awakening,
Uh-huh.
of becoming more conscious, more intentional in our choices. But how do we actually do that?
Right.
What are some practical steps we can take to start living more consciously?
The speaker offers a lot of practical advice throughout the recording,
Okay.
but I think it really boils down to a few key principles.
All right, lay it on us. What are those principles?
First, cultivate discernment. Question everything. Don't blindly accept the narratives you're given. Develop the skills to distinguish truth from falsehood, to identify biases and agendas, and to think critically about the information you encounter.
Okay, so be a critical thinker, a skeptic, a truth seeker.
Yes.
That's a good starting point. What else?
Second, build strong connections. Surround yourself with people who support your growth, who challenge your thinking, and who share your commitment to truth and authenticity.
So find your tribe,
Yeah.
your community of like-minded individuals.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding people who agree with you.
Right.
It's about seeking out diverse perspectives, engaging in respectful dialogue, and being willing to learn from those who see the world differently.
That makes sense. We need to break out of those echo chambers and expose ourselves to different viewpoints if we want to grow and evolve. What else?
Third, cultivate a practice of stillness and introspection.
Okay.
Create space in your life for reflection, meditation, or prayer. Whatever helps you to connect with your inner wisdom and to tap into a higher source of guidance.
So it's about like slowing down, quieting the noise of the world,
Yeah.
and listening to that inner voice, that intuition that guides us toward truth and authenticity.
Exactly. The speaker seems to be suggesting that in the midst of all this information overload, it's more important than ever to cultivate our own inner compass,
Right.
our own sense of what's true and right.
That resonates with me. It's easy to get swept up in the currents of the MetaWar. Yeah.
To get caught up in the drama and the fear. But maybe the real battle is about staying centered, grounded, and connected to our own truth.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And the speaker seems to be suggesting that this inner work, this cultivation of consciousness, it's not just about personal growth, but about changing the world. They argue that the more of us who awaken to the reality of this meta war and make conscious choices to align ourselves with truth and love, the stronger those forces become in the world.
So it's like we're building a collective consciousness, a network of awakened individuals who are radiating truth, love, and wisdom into the world.
That's a powerful image. And the speaker seems to believe that this collective awakening is our best hope for overcoming the challenges we face, for navigating the complexities of this meta war, and for creating a world that reflects our highest values and aspirations.
Wow. That's a lot to ponder.
Mm,
This deep dive has definitely left me with more questions than answers, but I feel like I have a better understanding of, the battlefield, so to speak.
yeah. It's not just about information, it's about consciousness.
Right.
It's about who we are, what we believe, and how we choose to engage with the world.
I think that's a great summary. And the speaker's final message seems to be a call to action, a challenge to step into our power as conscious creators and to choose a side in this meta war.
So, listener, the question is, what will you choose? What side will you fight for? How will you contribute to the awakening of humanity and the creation of a world that reflects truth, love, and justice? That's something to ponder as we conclude this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay discerning, and keep seeking the truth.